Ask any person who moved from a metropolis to a small town why they made such a decision, and you will hear a long list of reasons. One of the first points on this list will be safety. Small towns are traditionally much safer because everyone knows each other. Neighbors are always ready to lend a helping hand, and employers genuinely care about the interests of their employees. Jack Tindell and Sheena Sandifur moved to the tiny town of Arlington from Indianapolis. Sheena believed that in Arlington, they would be able to start afresh and their 5 children would be safe. They dreamed of escaping violence, but evil still caught up with them. For almost 6 months, city police, state police, and even FBI agents worked on the mystery of this case, uncovering the terrible secret surrounding the disappearance of 17-year-old Valerie Tindall. Valerie Tindall was born on August 29, 2005 in Indianapolis, Indiana. She was the middle child of Jack Tindell and Sheena Sandifur. Valerie was certainly not a quiet girl. She was a cheerful and sociable teenager who enjoyed spending time with her friends, her brother, and her 3 sisters. However, at a very young age, Valerie experienced trauma, and her mother believed that moving to a safer place would be better for the whole family. So they packed their things and moved to Arlington, located less than an hour's drive from Indianapolis. Arlington is a truly small, quiet town with a population of about 300 people. Jack and Sheena thought that in such a place, where life flows calmly and steadily, they would feel more at peace, especially for the children's sake. But even in a small town, evil can lurk. The summer of 2023 began very promisingly for Valerie. At 17 years old, she was a young, intelligent, and responsible girl who knew exactly what she wanted to dedicate her life to. Valerie decided to become a veterinarian, and although she had struggled with her studies before, this year she had made significant improvements and applied to various colleges. To her delight, several of them responded that they would accept her after she finished high school. Even during the summer holidays, Valerie wasn't planning to sit idly by. She found several part-time jobs. So on Wednesday, June 7th, 2023, Valerie left the house, got into her green Honda Accord, waved goodbye to her father, and drove off to work. Her father, Jack Tindall, noted that she was in a great mood and had a wide smile on her face. Valerie worked for her neighbor, 59-year-old Patrick Scott, who owned a lawn care company. Typically, Valerie had Wednesdays off, and on workdays, she usually rode with Patrick in his car. However, her family initially didn't pay much attention to these small inconsistencies. In the evening, when her daughter didn't come home, her mother, Sheena, became worried and, of course, called the neighbor. Patrick and his family lived on a large piece of land right across the road from the girl's house. Both families had long been close. Valerie, in particular, was friends with the granddaughter of the family head, and Sheena assumed that Valerie might have stayed at the neighbor's house, or at least they knew where she planned to go after work. However, Patrick said he had no idea what Sheena was talking about. Valerie didn't work for him on Wednesdays, and that Wednesday was no exception. They hadn't even discussed it. Naturally, Sheena didn't like this, but she wasn't overly worried, deciding it was just a small lie from a teenager. Perhaps her daughter had just decided to meet up with friends or her boyfriend and didn't want to inform her parents, a common occurrence at that age. So she thought Valerie would come home soon, at most by the next morning. But the family wasn't allowed to cling to this comforting thought for long. In the evening, Patrick Scott and his wife Linda came over to Sheena and Jack's house. They came to support the worried parents, but only made them more anxious by insisting that running away from home was typical for teenagers. Sheena didn't like that the neighbors were planting thoughts of her daughters running away in her head. She was probably even relieved when, after spending quite a bit of time with the family, Patrick and Linda finally left, leaving the worried parents alone. On the morning of June 8th, Valerie did not appear at home, and her parents contacted the police. Officers immediately began searching for her. Naturally, one of the first people detectives interviewed was Patrick, as Valerie had told her parents she was planning to work on Wednesday. He repeated what he had told her parents, that he hadn't seen Valerie at all on June 7th. He said the last time he saw her was on the 6th. However, police quickly discovered that he wasn't entirely truthful with them because there were witnesses who had seen Patrick and Valerie together on the day she disappeared. When asked to explain this discrepancy, Patrick changed his statement. He recalled that he did see Valerie on June 7th. They met near the apartment buildings in Shelbyville, a nearby town where they sometimes worked. They drove off together in his work truck. While they were driving, Valerie asked to be dropped off in Homer, another town about 5 kilometers from Arlington. There, she got into a blue car with a guy, and they drove off towards Rushville, another nearby town. Patrick claimed he did not see Valerie after that. Later, during interrogation, he adjusted his statement, saying he had actually dropped her off almost at the guy's house in Homer, and then returned to mow lawns near the apartment buildings in Shelbyville. When he finished work and returned to the spot where he had dropped Valerie off, she was no longer there. Realizing that his words were becoming less and less believable, Patrick insinuated that Valerie was afraid of her father because he mistreated her, and she probably ran away to escape him. The detectives no longer trusted Patrick, as they had heard multiple versions of the events of that day from him. They examined Valerie's phone and discovered that it was last pinged in Arlington, very close to her home and Patrick's home. Patrick had to change his testimony again. He admitted that after meeting with Valerie in Shelbyville, they both got into his car and went to his house. However, Patrick added that he left her at his home and went to work, and when he returned, she was gone. This version seemed a bit more plausible, at least because it was corroborated by the ping from Valerie's phone. But thanks to the examination of phones, the police were able to establish more than just that. On June 7th at 11:23 a.m., Valerie sent Patrick her last message, "I'll be there soon." Patrick responded with 2 messages, one at 5:40 p.m. on June 7th and another at 2:46 p.m. on June 8th. Both messages said, "Where are you?" Valerie didn't reply. This exchange is intriguing in itself. First, it confirms that they planned to meet that day. Second, it raises the question of why he would ask where she was. The thing is, Patrick didn't need to ask her location because he always knew exactly where Valerie was. He had added her to an app that tracked the location of all his family members. Valerie had mentioned this to her mother once. Sheena initially didn't understand what the app was and certainly didn't think it was appropriate for Patrick to track her daughter's whereabouts. As the parents soon found out, Patrick wasn't shy about using it. He tracked Valerie, and when he saw that she was out with friends or a boyfriend, he would call her father and complain. The parents were openly concerned about their neighbor's behavior towards their daughter. A 59-year-old husband, father, and grandfather was acting like a jealous boyfriend of their 17-year-old daughter. Moreover, after Valerie's disappearance, photos were found in her room from an aquarium visit, showing her with Patrick. The parents knew about this trip and had let Valerie go only because they thought the whole Scott family, including Patrick's granddaughter, who was friends with Valerie, was going. But judging by the photos, they were there alone. This was something the parents probably wouldn't have allowed. Overall, Sheena was worried about Patrick's attention to her daughter, but Valerie always dismissed her mother's doubts about Patrick Scott. Returning to the messages Patrick sent, if he could find out her location just by looking at his phone screen, why did he ask twice where she was? Most likely, he wanted to create an alibi or distance himself from Valerie on June 7th. However, despite Patrick's strange behavior, it wasn't illegal. Investigators couldn't arrest Valerie's employer in connection with her disappearance. They could arrest him for giving false statements to the police, but that wasn't enough for them because they felt Patrick was involved in Valerie's disappearance. Weeks and months passed, and there was no word from Valerie. The town was engulfed in fear, uncertainty, and unanswered questions. Her sister's graduation and Valerie's own birthday on August 29th came and went. Her parents desperately wanted to believe she had run away, but deep down, they didn't believe it, because their daughter would never miss such important family dates. However, they held on to the hope that she had a serious reason for running away. In one of the latest photos, Valerie looked like she might be pregnant. When someone on social media asked Valerie's mother, Sheena, if the girl could be expecting a child, she admitted that they had also considered that possibility. But the girl's relatives couldn't believe she would run away because of it. Valerie wasn't the type of person who would not come to her family, parents, or sisters with her problem. A mother's heart doesn't lie. And unfortunately, Sheena had known all along that the truth was much scarier. Meanwhile, investigators continued their work. To their credit, they didn't give up. Quite the opposite. Each day brought them closer to solving the case. By October 11th, 2023, they had enough suspicion to search a pond on the property adjacent to Patrick's. They brought cadaver dogs and examined the pond with the property owner's permission. The result was astonishing. 4 dogs independently detected the scent of human remains near or in the pond. Police called in divers who searched the pond but found nothing. The sonar also showed nothing. Disappointed, the police realized they might have missed something important. They consulted with the handlers, who explained that water, especially in ponds, can carry and hold smells for some time. The dogs might have detected the scent of decomposition near the pond because the smell was carried by the wind or groundwater runoff. And the closest property to the pond was Patrick Scott's yard. Using helicopters, the police surveyed the area around his home from the air and found many spots where the soil had been disturbed, indicating recent digging. Topographical analysis confirmed that groundwater could indeed have seeped from Patrick's property into the pond, which was only 90 meters away. Combining this with the fact that Patrick went to the store the day after Valerie disappeared and bought boards and plywood, there were more arguments in favor of searching his property. So, 7 weeks later, another search took place, this time around Patrick's house. Under construction debris piled up on the site of a recently burned garage, officers dug up 2 large homemade wooden boxes. The first contained various papers and documents as well as numerous tapes. The second box was buried under the first. It was wrapped in black tarpaulin and sealed with tape, but the smell emanating from the box left no doubt about its contents. Inside, the police found a girl's body. Although the body had already started to decompose, the nails of the deceased were covered with orange nail polish. Valerie had posted a photo with the same nail polish on social media just before her disappearance. Therefore, detectives were confident it was her. The medical examiner later confirmed that the body belonged to Valerie Tindall. The hopes of finding the missing teenage girl alive were shattered, and Patrick was immediately arrested. At the station, Patrick confessed to the murder, but tried to shift some of the blame onto the victim, perhaps hoping for mitigating circumstances. He recounted that on June 7, 2023, he and Valerie met near the apartment buildings in Shelbyville. Witnesses saw them there. One even heard Patrick promising Valerie a special lunch in Indianapolis. Valerie was clearly in high spirits that day, as confirmed by her father, who saw her leave with a wide smile. There is a theory that Patrick promised to buy Valerie a new car, a red convertible Mustang, which she was eagerly anticipating. But these were empty promises. Patrick had other plans that involved taking her to his home, where she would be completely under his control since his family was not home at the time. They got into his car and arrived at his place at 12:59 p.m. 7 minutes before they arrived, Valerie used her phone for the last time to check social media. Investigators found out that shortly after arriving home, Patrick began deactivating apps on his phone but forgot about the Apple Health app, which recorded a spike in his physical activity at around 1:35 p.m., just half an hour after they arrived. Although the exact details remain unclear, it's presumed that this was when the fatal incident occurred. According to Patrick, they were in the bedroom when an argument erupted. Valerie allegedly threatened to expose him, claiming he had seduced her unless he bought her a new car. She had an old car that was falling apart, and if her father couldn't fix it, Patrick intended to buy her a cheap replacement. But Valerie wanted a new car, which he couldn't afford. Patrick claimed that Valerie started undressing, but he was not going to tolerate her demands. A struggle ensued, involving kicking and pushing each other. Patrick then took off his belt, looped it around Valerie's neck, and strangled her. It's well known that it takes time to strangle someone, and Patrick could have stopped at any moment, but he didn't. When he realized Valerie was dead, he moved her body from the bedroom to his office. He then returned to Shelbyville, to the apartment buildings where Valerie had left her car. He drove her car to a different location and disposed of her keys and license plate by throwing them into a river, the exact location of which he couldn't remember. However, a witness saw Patrick driving the victim's car, confirming this part of his story. Later, when his family was home, they went about their regular routines while Valerie's body lay wrapped in black tarpaulin in the office. Patrick said nothing to his family, asserting that they were not involved in the murder. The next morning, Patrick went to a supermarket and bought boards and plywood for a box to place her body in. He used a hole that was already dug on his property. While the pre-dug hole might suggest premeditation, Patrick insisted it was for entirely different purposes. Regardless, he placed Valerie's body in the homemade box, covered it with another box containing tapes and papers, and buried everything. Then, at 2 a.m., he burned down his garage. How could he have thought this wouldn't arouse suspicion? Right after a girl disappears in a town of 300 people, her neighbor suddenly decides to burn down his garage in the middle of the night. Of course, this screamed that Patrick should be scrutinized as a suspect. Patrick denied any romantic relationship or attempt to seduce Valerie, though he admitted they often spent time together outside of work, going out to eat or shop. It's suspicious, however, that the crime occurred in his bedroom. Why go to the bedroom with a teenage girl to discuss work matters? Despite his confession to Valerie's murder, Patrick was likely not completely truthful with the investigators. And judging by his answers to the questions, he shows no remorse for what he's done. When asked if he planned the murder, the man replied, "No, it just happened." And when directly asked if he's troubled by killing someone, a girl who worked for him, whose family he was friends with, he casually responded, "I wasn't thrilled about it." Detectives note that sometimes the words a criminal doesn't say can be more revealing than the ones he does. They characterize him best. And according to the police report, Patrick Scott didn't express regret for taking Valerie's life. He didn't say he regretted the pain inflicted on her parents, who learned that their daughter was killed and buried in a box just meters away from their home. He didn't even express regret for the shame and disgrace he brought upon his own family. No, he was too self-centered. For Valerie's parents, Jack and Sheena, it's painful to realize that Valerie worked for Patrick for 2 years, and he didn't even have the decency to feel remorse. Especially considering they were friends, good neighbors, close acquaintances. Despite Patrick's claim that his family wasn't involved in the murder, Jack and Sheena believe they know the truth. But they have no evidence, only feelings, suspicions. They were initially puzzled by Linda's odd statements and the fact that when suspicion fell on Patrick and he was detained, his son quickly drove his car to the car wash. And then they couldn't help but wonder why he set fire to his garage in the middle of the night right after the neighbor's disappearance. Nevertheless, at this moment, charges have only been brought against Patrick. Valerie's distraught mother told journalists that the family moved from Indianapolis because Valerie suffered trauma at a young age, prompting them to exchange city jungles for a place with a more measured pace of life and the tranquility of the countryside. "We moved from Indianapolis to escape violence," she said, "and settled across the road from the predator.